Hey, this is Sky. Welcome to my YouTube channel. So in the mid-90s, I was living in Santa Cruz, California. It was not too long after my father got murdered. And Santa Cruz seemed like a cool town. When I first got there, I didn't like it. I remember walking along West Cliff Drive, which is the most beautiful part of town, right along the beach. Their beaches are amazing. These rocky cliffs. They have tide pools there. When the tide goes out, water's left in these kind of rocky areas, and inside those tide pools you see all kinds of ocean life. They're crystal clear, and you can see anemones and fish. I've seen octopus in there, and it's pretty amazing. You look out into the beach, and if you stare long enough, you'll see dolphins, you'll see whales spouting up. The Monterey Bay was named a national wildlife sanctuary, so they don't have oil wells out there. Along the coast of California, you have a lot of oil wells that you can see, and whatever. It's just not as exciting, but the Monterey Bay is really amazing, full of wildlife. And I'm walking along the bike path along West Cliff, thinking about, why did I come to this fucking town? It's not really what I expected. I can't really afford to live here. And just as I was thinking about bailing out of town, I looked down, and in the dirt along the path was a bag of weed, marijuana. So I picked it up and, gave a look around, shoved it in my pocket. I went back to my van, and I had just rolled into town. I didn't really have a place to live yet. No, I did. I was living in a garage. A friend of mine gave up his room. He was living in someone's garage. No bathroom, no electricity. He was just put a sleeping bag on the ground. And he was like, I'm bailing out of the garage, but they said that they would let you stay there. So I paid like $100 a month to sleep in someone's garage. But I really hadn't settled in yet. And I picked up that bag of weed and I went back to the garage and smoked it. And decided to stay. It was that bag of weed that made me decide to stay in Santa Cruz. I finally got an apartment of my own. It wasn't an apartment, but I was renting rooms in different houses. And I found a big giant hippie house a couple blocks off the beach, a couple blocks from West Cliff Drive in that beautiful area over on the west side. And they called it the Seaside House because it was on Seaside Street. It was a great big house, a little bit run down, but there was a bunch of rooms. And it was 5 lesbian chicks, real militant lesbians, and one dude who was bisexual. And he was interesting, this guy Tim. He was in different bands. He liked to play that, what I call wacky jazz, which was kind of it's like experimental jazz fusion, weird stuff. But he was a cool dude. He had been a porn star for a while. I don't want to know what kind of porn he was doing. But I hung out with Tim. The rest of the lesbian chicks would pick on me, but they were nice. We'd have these terrible political conversations around the dinner table. They'd pick on me. One of the roommates was this chick, Kathy. And Kathy was a hippie, and she was a nudist. And she liked to be nude, liked to be naked all the time. So you'd very often see Kathy walk around butt naked. She had an okay body. She was, physically fit. She'd be outside in the backyard very often. I'd come home and Kathy would be out there. We had a little garden. Hippies like gardens. And she'd be in the garden butt naked, digging away with her little shovels and doing stuff and getting dirty. I eventually moved out of the seaside house and got my own apartment down in the ghetto. Me and my brother moved down to the barrio, the Mexican neighborhood. It's called the Flats. I found out through the grapevine one day, because Santa Cruz is a fairly small town, I found out that Kathy had died. Now, I wasn't incredibly close to Kathy, but I knew her, I lived with her. And I was like, oh, that sucks, you know. How did that happen? I maybe thought it was maybe some sort of illness or something, but no. Turned out she had gotten run over on her bicycle down on West Cliff Drive. Now, Kathy was a big-time surfer. I knew she was a surf chick. There's a heavy-duty surf culture in Santa Cruz. That's part of the fabric of the town. Skateboarding and surfing are like a part of that town. I had no idea how involved with the surf scene she was, but I knew that she was a surfer. So I was told that that following Saturday or Sunday, I forget what day it was, but that following weekend, there was going to be a service for Kathy on the cliffs by West Cliff Drive. And it was going to be kind of a surfer-themed service, funeral service. So I went. I felt really sorry for her. She was young, 25, something like that. She was young. And she didn't do nothing wrong. She was run over by some drunk driver, and she was a good person, and she didn't deserve it. She should still be alive today. But as shit goes, we don't always get a chance to live a full life. I learned that at a young age. We take that shit for granted. People just kind of think it's a given. You're going to live a long time. As long as you don't fuck up, you'll live a long time. Sometimes shit happens. You got to be grateful for every day that you're alive. So I went to the service. And it was one of the most amazing things I had ever been to. It really enlightened me. It really stuck with me. Kind of gave me ideas in my head, both good and bad. Some kind of bad ideas about myself and my own path, but something to shoot for. And when I got there, the first thing I noticed, found a little parking space off in the neighborhood and walked up the bike path to where the cliff they were having their ceremony was. And it was unmistakable because there was easily about 500 people, massive crowd of people, crowding in on the cliffs into this one area. I couldn't believe it. I was like, what are all these people doing here? Kathy knew everybody in town. I had no idea she was so popular. I had no clue. That never came up in conversation. When I lived with her, it wasn't like you would know that she wasn't having tons of people over, and she didn't seem to have a large social scene. She just seemed like the rest of us. But she wasn't. She was special, apparently, and she knew everybody. I saw people there that I hadn't seen in years. I lived in that town for a while. I saw people there that I had seen maybe once at a party. They were at Kathy's funeral. I saw people that lived in other houses. I didn't think they had any knowledge of who Kathy is, but they were at the funeral. And I saw all the old roommates from the seaside house, of course. The ceremony started with, they had a little PA system and a microphone. And it started with a couple people getting up and talking about Kathy. It was a little bit hard to hear because when the wind blows, it kind of blew the sound away. So you had to be standing in the right spot to hear it. I was kind of standing off to the side, close to this railing that you could oversee the cliff and look out into the ocean. I guess it was Kathy's mother, could have been her aunt, somebody, some big fat chick, dressed in a long tie-dye dress. I remember her, she looked like a grape because she was like a purple dress and she was just almost perfectly round with a little head on top. And she gave a pretty touching little eulogy, whatever you want to call it, about Kathy and her life and how she was when she was a little girl and how innocent and nice she always was, how loving she always was, how willing to help people, that kind of stuff. And then she turned around and gave a signal down to the beach, because we were up on the cliff and there's a strip of beach below it. So I'm standing on the railing, I look down there, and there's about 40 or 50, a bunch of surfers. And these were Kathy's surf buddies, surf friends, because there's a large surf community there, so she was part of that community. And they all get on their surfboards and surf out in a big line, big long line. long line of surfers, and they're surfing out past the waves, all the way out. They get pretty far out past where the waves break. The water's a little bit more settled. And they all form a giant circle, a big, massive circle. And they're holding hands. They're sitting on their surfboards now. They're not lying on them anymore. And they're sitting on their surfboards, all holding hands in this big, massive circle. And the crowd was silent. I mean, you could hear people breathing next to you. You could hear a pin drop if it would have dropped. I mean, it was eerily silent. No cars were driving by. You couldn't hear. Even the birds were chirping. Nothing. The wind wasn't blowing in the palm trees. You know, that makes kind of a noise. Nothing. Couldn't hear nothing. It was just silent. And these surfers are way, way out in the water. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they all let out this kind of ear-curdling, screeching cheer. It was somewhere between a cheer of like victory, like Braveheart going into battle, but it was almost like a sorrowful cry. And they're all holding hands, and these surfers are just screaming up into the air. Even thinking about it makes me emotional. I'll never forget it. And then the funeral, that was the end of the service. And the funeral service was over. People hung out for a minute. Some people smoked some joints. And me and my homeboy, we left. We went back down to the barrio. And as I drove back down there to the hood, with all the gang members around, I sat on my front porch. There's cops going by. Cops treat you like you're a fucking animal. You don't have to be part of nothing. You could be a good person. They treat you like you're a fucking animal because you're down there. And I looked around at my life, the person that I had become, the lifestyle that I was living. And I was pretty heavy in the streets at that point. I was hanging out with the Mexican mafia. I was up to all kinds of no good activity. And I realized that if I died right now, someone could easily just drive by. I had enemies. I had plenty of enemies. I was beefing with different gangs. It's one thing when you have a little beef with somebody that you don't like, somebody at the bar, somebody that you just don't like, you have a rivalry. Try having a rivalry with a whole gang. So I knew my life was on a string. I could just as easily die tomorrow, and I'd probably deserve it. Kathy didn't deserve it. I probably would. I realized that nobody would show up at my funeral. I'd be lucky to have one person. One. I'd be lucky. And I realized, man, I got to figure out how to have more people at my funeral. It's kind of been a goal of mine. When I die, it'd be nice if more than one person showed up. It'd be nice if one person showed up. I'd be lucky. But it would be cool if a few people showed up. It'd be cool to be able to affect people in the way that Kathy affected people. To where they miss you when you're gone. I've seen so many motherfuckers die. And you get hardened to it. Somewhat. I mean, it always sucks. But you can justify it, especially out in the streets. Yeah, they deserved it. Motherfuckers commit suicide sometimes and they figure, well, they're just a pussy. They couldn't handle it. But you put on this fake hard attitude and realize that people get over you pretty quick. It may suck for a minute when somebody dies, but you get over it the next week, the next day. But I was always left with that thought in the back of my head that one of my goals in life is to figure out how to have people show up at my funeral. I got to figure out how to do that, how to be a good enough person to have a happening funeral, to have people screech and scream for me. big circle. Thanks for watching.